Hi there, Dave here with a video about my pseudocode style. My pseudocode versus Mark's pseudocode versus the book pseudocode versus everybody else's thoughts about pseudocode. So I'm real sticky about the pseudocode, and yet I seem to be a little loose about how I do it, maybe relative to the book. So let's take a look at how I do things and how the book thing does things and how Mark does. He did his own video about pseudocode. I assume you've looked at that. And so I want to talk about these styles. These styles, you can use Mark's style, you can use the book style, you can use my style, because there's commonality between them. I kind of have an abbreviated style. Let's take a look at the last project that we worked on. It was project 3, the third version of the calculator. I did a video about this. This is where we did our test. And so what I'm going to talk about now is what we wound up with as far as its organization and how it looks, the pseudocode and the real code. So we wound up with the main down here. And then we said call main. It's hard to start the whole thing out. At the bottom, because the code that gets executed is actually at the bottom, right? Because we have to have all of our procedures defined inside of Python first. But the way that the rest of the world looks at things is not the way Python looks at things. It says that normally you have something called main, and it's going to execute first, and it's going to get run by your language. Somehow you're going to make sure that that gets run first. And so in pseudocode, we always put the main up at the top, and then we never say call main. It's just assumed that main will get called. And so it doesn't really change the way the code runs. The code down here is the same. That code's not, not going to change anything that gets executed in this entire video. I'm just going to talk about style and how we talk about it, where things go. So you still have to have this main down here to run the whole deal in Python. But the main should be at the top. Okay, so what I did was I left this project alone and I made another project. And so project 4, which is the one that you should be looking at also, and download it on this page, is right here. So this guy has got two versions. He's got my style and he's got the book style. So I thought I'd put in for this project how I do it and how I would like for you to do your pseudocode from now on, and then how the book does it. So let's take a look. The main should be up at the top. And notice that inside the pseudocode, we don't refer to the main. We just assume that the main's going to get executed. And so, but it does go at the top. And so we have our input variables, our output variables, then we have the main. And that makes sense because main is going to get run first. It's at the top. It's the driver of everything. And then your other routines underneath them, usually in some kind of a hierarchical sequence. Although it's just loosey-goosey, sometimes alphabetical sequence. Depends on how many you have. Here I have probably the next most important routine followed by the next most important routine. But that's, you can only maintain that for a little bit of a little length, and only if it's of value. So, how's the book do this? Well, before we look at that, let's take a look at the code. All I did was I moved main up to the top. We still have to have the main down here. I call main down here. But I did put main up at the top, and it makes the pseudocode and the real code. And it makes it easy to read. That's good. Let's see the way the book does it. Well, the book does it. Notice the code down below is exactly the same as I did it. It's a little bit more verbose from my perspective, but it's just fine. If you want to do it this way, it's all totally fine. Here, for every module, we have an end module. I just left them off and I depended upon indenting to tell you where you were. Notice that in my version, I just left the end module off because I said, well, there's the next module. This is, pretty obvious, this stuff. Same thing with the if. Notice there's the if statement, the way that I do it. Here's the way you'll probably see it. There's the if, and then there's the then at the end. And then there's the end if. And there's an else, and the end else. And the end module. And notice also that the type of value being returned is not specified, where in my version I do. Except for main, because main never does have a return in any language. The only return it has is whether or not the program executed correctly, and that's done in usually a special that exit way. So that's a special kind of a deal. So that's why main is special. It doesn't return anything. The rest of them, yeah, you see I have the type that it's going to return, where in the book that is not always there. All right, so the main differences are there are end modules and end if and end else, and there's the then. And if these help you understand the code, by all means use them. And so you have latitude. What I don't want to see is I don't want to see some end modules and not all end modules, and some end ifs and not all end ifs. So whichever approach you use, just try to be consistent. Take care.